Hello! Today we're going to be doing something different. Today we're going to be reading by the light of this candle here, which I bought specifically for this purpose because it has a glass rim for the light to come out on directly onto the page. So I think it'll make for some great visuals and great ASMR, sort of an old medieval style way of doing it. When we last left off, we were with Hagrid and the gang. Hermione had just introduced herself. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and a boy named Neville, who keeps getting his toad lost, had all just crossed a great black mirror lake and come to Hogwarts for the first time. They're all very excited. If you remember when you first went to a brand new place too, it's very exciting when you're young. Okay, let's get to reading. Chapter 7. The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid.
"Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here."
She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fitted the entirety of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts, like this one. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small empty chamber of the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously.
"Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats at the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each each produced hundreds and thousands of outstanding witches and wizards. While you're at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn you house points, while any rule breaking will make you lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly."
She left the chamber. Harry swallowed hard.
"How exactly do they sort us into these houses?" he asked Ron.
"Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt.
A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do?
He hadn't expected something like this the moment that they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking about it except for Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all of the spells she'd learnt and wondering which one she'd have to use. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never, not even when he had to take a school report to the Dursleys, saying that he'd somehow managed to turn his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead them down to doom. Then something happened which made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just appeared through the back wall. Pearly white and somewhat transparent, they glided across the room, taking in each other and hardly glancing in the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say." I'll give you one more good look at these ghosts. Oh, look at that. Look at the little dog ghosts here. Little dog ghosts. There's another one. The horse and his knight. Very cool. Ought to give him a second chance. My dear Friar, haven't we forgotten Peeves and all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, you know. He's not even really a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here? A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "Ah, new students," said the fat friar, smiling around at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few students nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony's about to start." Professor McGonagall returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite of a wall. "Now, form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into a line behind a boy with sandy hair. With Ron behind him, they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors at the Great Hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles, which were floating in mid-air over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students sat. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here, so that they could come to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like the pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver, mainly to avoid all the staring eyes. Harry looked upwards and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read it in Hogwarts, a history." It was hard to believe that there was a ceiling there at all, and that the Great Hall didn't simply open out into the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have left it in the house. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed the sort of thing that wizards would do. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. I'm not going to sing though. "Oh, you may not think I am pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head that the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwelled the brave at heart. Their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they're just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid to toil. Or, yet, in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've got a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or, perhaps, in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I am the thinking cap." The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables, and then became quite still again. "So, we've just got to try on the hat," Ron whispered to Harry. "Oh, kill Fred.
He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everybody else watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit in the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott, Hannah. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of the line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down on the stool. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones, Susan. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat again, and Susan scuffled off to sit next to Hannah. Boot, Terry. Ravenclaw. The second table from the left clapped. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brocklehurst, Mandy. She went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender came the first to New Gryffindor. To the table on the far left exploded with cheers when it happened. Harry could see Ron's twin brother's cat calling. That's funny. Bulstrode, Millicent, then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination. After all, he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to definitely feel sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during sport lessons at his old school. He had always been the last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletchley Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus. The sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned, ugh. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible as thoughts always do when you're nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with his hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head, and then suddenly, somehow this was a mistake and he'd have to get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville when it finally shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off still wearing it, and he had to jog back to the gales of laughter to give it back to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swiggered towards his name, and called, and wished at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin. Malfoy went to join his friends at Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many left now. Moon? Not? Parkinson? Then a pair of twin girls. Patil? And Patil? And Perks? Sally Ann? And then at last, Potter? Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter. Did she say Potter? Yes, the Harry Potter. The last thing that Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was a hall full of people craning to get a better look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, Not Slytherin, please, not Slytherin.
Not Slytherin, eh? And as the voice said, Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on this way to greatness. No doubt about that. No. Well, if you're sure, better be. Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat and the last word that was mentioned by it when the whole hall took off. He ran off the hat and walked shakily towards the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the ruff that he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden horrible feeling that he just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the nearest end sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back, and there, in the centre of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card that he'd gotten out of the chocolate frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there were only 3 people left to be sorted. Turpin, Lisa, became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now and anxious. Harry crossed his fingers under the table, and then a second later the hat shouted, "Gryffindor!" Harry clapped loudly with the rest as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. "Well done, Ron. Excellent," said Percy the prefect. Weasley... Zambini Blaze was made a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He'd only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasty seemed ages ago now. Albus Dumbledore had got to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. "Is he a bit mad?" he asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad?" said Percy airily. "He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes." "Potatoes, Harry." Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat in one table. Oh, it's going to make my mouth water. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, chips, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, mint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken everything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except for the humbugs and began to eat. It was all so delicious. "Oh, that does look good," said the ghost in the ruff, sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. "Can you—" "I haven't eaten in nearly 500 years, said the ghost. "I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower." "I know who you are," said Ron suddenly. "My brother's told me all about you. You're Nearly Headless Nick." "I would prefer you to call me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy," the ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. "Nearly headless? How could you be nearly headless?" Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going at all the way he wanted. "Like this," he said irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. His whole head swung off his neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was on a hinge. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks of their faces, Nearly Headless Nick flipped his... Here he is. His nearly chopped up neck. Head back on his way to Neck. He coughed and he said, "So, new Gryffindors. I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindor have never gone so long without winning. Slytherin have got the cup 6 years in a row now. The bloody Baron's almost becoming unbearable. He's the Slytherin ghost." Harry looked over at the Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there with blank, staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who, Harry was pleased to see, didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. "How did he get covered in blood?" asked Seamus with great interest. "I've never asked," said Nearly Headless Nick. And we are going to stop it there.